You want to finish what you started? You came to the right place. Them girls that you came with, you might have to part with. Depending on how this thing shakes. Wauwatosa, Kenosha, Economowalk is in the house.
Hello, Northeast Wisconsin, and welcome to what is, for lack, a better term, an emergency episode of the New Look podcast to discuss the U.S. Postal Service. I'm joined by my daughter, Grace, who's a little bit fussy right now, but this week we've seen confusion, chaos, and in some cases outright conspiracy surrounding this issue of the Postal Service, fueled by stories in the media that the U.S. Postal Service allegedly, under the president's direction, was having mailboxes removed and mail sorting machines dismantled as a way to prevent mail-in voting. Oh, I see it even upset the baby. But if you're like me, when you saw these headlines, and I think I first kind of became aware of it this past weekend when I turned on the TV to watch some of the Sunday shows, my initial reaction wasn't, oh, this is fake news or, this is manufactured. I'm like, what the heck is going on? Is this actually happening? Are people trying to, oh no, I don't know if this is going to work. Are people actually trying to mess with the post office in order to get an electoral advantage? So I just started calling people I knew, smart people on this issue, started reading as much as possible, and I wanted to kind of take you into that process because I actually think it's very, very important because this sort of mini conspiracy theory is a perfect encapsulation of a lot of the news cycles that have played out in the context of this presidential race. And I think it goes a long way towards explaining why people are so divided and are so disconcerted right now. And a lot of times people come up to me in Northeast Wisconsin and say, is this true? I don't even know it's true. And what isn't? And because you have such a bizarre social media and media environment, and you have a lot of crazy conspiracy theorists out there taking advantage of it, it's hard for a lot of common sense Wisconsinites to determine what's real and what isn't. So I kind of want to take you into that process, and we're going to start with a new look at the Postal Service with Kevin Kosar. Kevin is the Vice President of Research at the R Street Institute. He's one of the nation's leading scholars on postal issues. I had the chance to talk with him multiple times this week about the Postal Service and how we got where we are, and really the perfect storm of events that led to all this chaos. And so let's begin with that. I apologize. The audio was bad when we started recording, and so there may be a bit of an abrupt transition. But let's start with that interview with Kevin, where I think he does a really good job of just explaining what's true and what isn't, and putting into the context of the broader structural issues with the post office.
We are here with an emergency podcast to understand what the heck is going on with the post office, and we are lucky to be joined by a great scholar of congressional institutional devolution and evolution, a man after my own heart, Kevin Kosar. Kevin, how are you, sir?
I'm busy. Postal Service is usually not a hot topic. I've been covering it 17 years, and this is pretty weird. Weird times.
I was joking to you yesterday, as a former Arabist. Prior to the Arab Spring, there was like one Tunisia specialist in the entire think tank community, and then when things lit off in Tunisia, that person became very busy for the first time in a long time. So, hey, you can never predict these things, but we're lucky to have you here. So, Evan, where do we begin? Maybe I turned on the TV this weekend. That was my first mistake. And, watching Meet the Press, I'm like, oh my gosh, is Trump tearing down every mailbox in America? Like, what's going on here? So what's happening let's start with just the issue of mailboxes and mail sorting machines, because I think that ties into bigger trends with mail. So tell us what's actually happening here.
Okay. Here's the first everyone should know, in which unfortunately the media has not spoken up enough about. For years, the Postal Service has been rationalizing its network. I mean, on my Twitter feed, 2012 GAO report on network rationalization. network rationalization, it's the Postal Service doing what it should do, which is to look at all of its facilities, all its mail collection boxes, look at everything that is logistics infrastructure, and where are the inefficiencies, where are they not. And what is that the Postal Service, a regular course of business, takes collection boxes out of, they move them one to another, or they get rid of them entirely. They close post office, they close mail sorting facilities, certain out of service, funding, which I should say, market, in fact, for paper went way down, more than 30% 2008.
So, big picture, less paper mail is being sent through the U.S. Postal Service, which is driving the post office to rightly consolidate its infrastructure and mailboxes that are underused, correct?
30C is run an efficient system of mail. And so, yeah, as a matter of course, looking at their internal operation, they had 1,000 employees. Now they're down to 100. So it's a gradual time that the Postal Service has made. It's a responsible thing to do.
So, despite what a picture you may have seen shared online, is it fair to say to my constituents, no one, the Postmaster General nor the President of the United States, is trying to destroy mailboxes in order to prevent mail-in voting in the 2020 election?
Yeah. I think it's a very unfortunate thing that the Postal Service does not have available online trend line data for all the sort of stuff that they do to rationalize their network. You can find it tucked in PDFs of various reports they issue, but that data should be put out there in a way that's easily understandable. And I think we could have avoided a whole lot of angst over the last 10 days if that knowledge had been readily available. Because unfortunately, most voters are not going to pay attention to how the Postal Service operates. And when a story runs in a newspaper saying Trump's new guy is pulling machines out and he's limiting overtime and he's slowing the mail, yeah, it understandably causes a panic, but it's still a panic as opposed to an informed response.
And I think it collides with what is a related but separate issue, which is just the financial state of the post office, right? Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about the overall, as mail has gone down, what's going on with the finances of the post office right now?
So the good news is we don't have to worry about the Postal Service running out of money anytime soon. It has $14 billion in its bank account. It has an additional $10 billion borrowing line from the U.S. Treasury that was given to it in the CARES Act that was passed by Congress and signed by the president. It's not going to shut down due to lack of money. So put your ballots in the mail, put them in early. It's going to be okay. Now, the long-term picture for the Postal Service is trickier. Right now, paper mail volume keeps going down. Parcel volume keeps going up, and COVID has really spiked that up even higher. So much so that in Q3 of 2020, the Postal Service earned more money than they did in Q3 of 2019. But don't let that obscure the long-term trend, which is a declining demand in the main thing that the Postal Service does, which is move paper mail. And that is a problem that we desperately need Congress to approach, because the Postal Service is running structural deficits. Its costs regularly outstrip its revenues, and it has over $150 billion in unfunded obligations, debt, pensions, retiree health benefits, and a couple other items.
And on that last point, how much of that is driven by I believe it was a 2006 law that required the post office to pre-fund retiree medical benefits?
That law said to the Postal Service, you've got a wave of retirees coming. You usually pay for their health care out of your pocket. You're not going to have that much cash laying around when people start retiring in droves like that. So it's kind of like the 401k, where, put some of your money aside so you don't spend it and then find yourself without money later on in life. That law forced the Postal Service to start putting money aside. That law also took some pension funds and put it in the Retiree Health Benefits Fund. All in all, it was a good thing for retirees. Right now, the Postal Service is actually drawing money out of the Retiree Health Benefits Fund to pay its retirees. So I can't imagine what they would be doing were it not for that fund. It's a positive thing, but a lot of folks on the left and often the unions make out the Retiree Health Benefits Fund to be a boogeyman. But it was a responsible thing to do. Was it done perfectly by Congress? No, but it was a responsible thing to do. Unfortunately, the Postal Service quit paying into the Retiree Health Benefits Fund back in 2012, which means that fund is going down, 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 and the GAO predicts that the fund will be empty within 10 years. And guess what? The Postal Service is not going to have the cash to pay retirees then, and we may be stuck with the American taxpayer bailout.
And is it fair to, I sort of viewed the $25 billion figure, which is at issue here. It's not about election security. That's the most important thing. It's about addressing that fiscal imbalance, right? Is it fair to look at it as a bailout?
It's $25 billion being sent to the Postal Service for no clear purpose.
When it has $14 billion right now and the ability to borrow $10 billion more as a result of the CARES Act, correct?
Correct. Yeah, it'd be a different story if Congress was saying, hey, you, the Postal Service, we know that you don't have enough money to process all these parcels, so we're going to give you some money for that. Or, hey, we're worried about your retiree health benefits situation. We're going to give you money that's going to go into that fund to protect retirees' benefits. Congress isn't saying anything like that. It's just proposing to throw money at the Postal Service for no particular purpose.
So let's go back to the election. So what do we have? 150 million roughly registered voters. To help place the post office's ability to process an increase in absentee ballots, or even the states that are doing universal vote by mail, put that in the context of the overall mail volume it deals with.
Sure. Postal Service carries more than 140 billion mail pieces per year. That comes out to about 2.8 billion pieces per week. And when it comes to absentee ballots, what we're talking about is, let's say, 150 million. And
that's at the high end.
That's at the high end. And that also is a number where all those ballots are not going to be dumped in the same week, because people can vote early. So those things are going to be coming in. Both postal management and the head of one of the Postal Service's unions made it very clear late last week when they said, this will be a piece of cake. We will have no problem handling these ballots. They don't need extra money. They're getting paid to handle all those ballots. So it'll be fine.
So that's a critical point. I mean, we're not doing universal vote by mail for a variety of reasons, but even in the scenario in which we're doing massive vote by mail, the post office still has the ability to process it.
Yeah, I mean, the whole issue is that the Postal Service, in large part due to the cratering of volume, has excess capacity to process. And that's why we were having machines being taken out of service, because they weren't needed. They were an expense. So it's very interesting. I would call attention to today a column in the New York Times by a former commissioner of the Postal Regulatory Commission, Ruth Goldway. She was on the regulatory board for 18 years. She's a Democrat. She's a Democrat who's very left. Ruth Goldway wrote that Americans have nothing to fear. The Postal Service has ample mail processing capacity.
Wow. Okay, but talk a little bit about, I think, a concern that was expressed by the post office to the states, which is that if their timelines change for how they're doing mail-in elections, they may not be able to process it in time.
Right. Yeah. You know, these letters to the states were being prepared before DeJoy became the PMG. So that's important to know. This was not something that he just conjured up. And what these are saying to states is, don't put us in a bad position like you did in New York City in the primary. For those who don't know what happened, what happened was that a local election administrator in New York City dumped on the Postal Service the day before the election more than 30,000 ballot and ballot materials. And that sort of unpredicted surge is very difficult for the Postal Service to handle. They have more than enough capacity, but you can't jam them at the very last second and expect the ballots to be delivered in 3 days or returned in 3 days. It's just an unreasonable expectation. I liken it to the McDonald's. Can McDonald's handle, 500 people over a 15-hour period? Yeah, piece of cake. But if 500 people show up at 8 a.m., that's a problem.
And that's the issue, right? You don't want a state that changes its rules and says, okay, you can get an absentee ballot up to a week before the election, but it must be received and processed no later than the day of the election,
right?
Because then the post office, even with its excess capacity and the fact that no one's trying to shut the post office down, can't really do the turnaround in time. So you increase the likelihood that those votes won't count.
Yeah, you're creating an unreasonable expectation. And the Postal Service, beyond that, is managing an additional problem, which is COVID, which is affecting members of their workforce. It's looking forward at the election and it's saying, look, we got more ballots coming in. Let's flatten the curve and have those ballots come in sooner and not all at the last second, because we don't want people to be disenfranchised. I mean, that's what their letter explicitly said. Don't risk disenfranchising people. And they also are keeping an eye on their workforce because, if COVID starts to hit a particular city particularly heavily, you could have a lot of postal workers not show up, which could create an issue, particularly if there's a spike in elections mail dumped in at the last minute.
So the way you lay this seems extremely logical to me, common sense. How did this become so misinformed? Like, this is a weird conspiracy theory now. This is like a QAnon situation.
Well, it's an elections year. There's that. It's also the case that the president has said any number of things about the Postal Service that were intemperate, and which gave the appearance of like him wanting to stop people voting by mail, which, we know he votes by mail. We also know that in many states, Republicans vote in droves by mail. So the president has confused the waters, to put it mildly. It's also the case that, the Postal Service unions, they were just confronted with a new boss. It was a boss that they didn't ask for. It was a boss from the private sector. And, if you're playing power politics, why not put the boss in his place? So what you do is you start leaking internal documents about plant closures. You start amplifying complaints about where there were service disruptions and slowdowns. And it suddenly gets put together as, aha, Trump's against voting by mail. His minion is running the post office. He's disrupting the mail. It's a conspiracy theory. But as we all know, DC does not do conspiracy theories very well because we're not that organized here.
Well, don't let a good, the truth get in the way of a good, juicy story, I guess. So where can people go to read more about this, your own work, or is it on the R Street website, or what's the best place for people who want to read more about your thoughts on this?
Probably my Twitter handle at Kevin R. Kosar, Kosar. I mean, that's the place where I'm putting out data about the Postal Service, reports on the Postal Service, the aforementioned Ruth Goldway column, people who are saying very sober, educated things about the situation, which I hope that people find educational and also reassuring.
Which, by the way, like once we get past this weird little fake crisis, we still have the big issue, which is the Postal Service, like many industries, is being disrupted by the digital age. It has a retiree pension health problem that the U.S. military has the same thing, and figuring that out and fixing it is a difficult process. And I know you've written about some potential ways to modernize the post office and fix these issues. Is there a single sort of document or article that you've written that has all that?
Yeah, if readers Google Kosar, Postal, and Politico, you'll see an article I wrote in April where I put forth a 7-point plan for rescuing the Postal Service that could be done with relative ease, and that Congress, I wish, would enact.
If only I knew a member of Congress. Well, on that issue, because I love that hat and I want to get one. In the 4 minutes we have left, how do we make Congress great again?
Well, I think first and foremost, we need to help more members of Congress take a mindset that Constitution matters. The Constitution makes Congress the first branch, and the Constitution, they're not equal branches. Article 1, the legislature, it's numero uno, and it has any number of authorities that it can use to direct the other branches to follow the law and do as it wishes. Part of that involves reclaiming the power of the purse. It's amazing how often Congress complains about executive agencies running amok and disobeying them. Cut off the money. Reestablish the power of the purse. But that requires a whole different mindset. That means getting past the sort of mentality of, I'm the party of the president, so I will just line up behind the president, or I'm the party against the president, so I'll just line up against the president. That sort of red shirt, blue shirt partisanship makes it very hard for Congress to be great.
It does seem we've sort of like stumbled into a more parliamentary process than was originally intended. What's the original sin of all this? Is this the Watergate babies in the 70s doing bad budget process? And where do you trace this back to?
I think the long-term weakening of committee chairs. It used to be power in Congress was heavily balkanized between the people who led the various committees. Now power is primarily concentrated at the top, and it basically creates a binary situation. You got the speaker versus the minority leader. It's a WrestleMania type situation, and their incentive structures is to line up behind the president or oppose the president. Very different story when you have a lot of committee chairs with power.
Well, you heard it here first. Balkanization is not always a bad thing. Straight from the expert himself. Kevin, thank you for taking some time to help us dissect the post office issue, which I know has gotten a lot of people riled up. I think this is so important because it's so dangerous, right? When either side tries to delegitimize the election itself, it creates a situation where half the country is going to wake up on November 4th and think the whole thing was corrupt and rigged. That's a very combustible situation. And that's like pouring gasoline on a fire of partisanship that we're already seeing. So thanks for helping us make sense of it.
Thanks for the opportunity.
All right, my friend. We'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Okay, that's Kevin's perspective. But for my Democratic friends, they might say, well, he's a conservative, so and R Street's a conservative institution, although it takes interesting positions on a lot of things. But of course, he's going to have that perspective. Fair enough. I actually tried to get some nonpartisan and Democratic voices to come on, but the timing didn't work. But they've all published prominent op-eds or quotes that you can read. And so, for example, Stephen Kearney, who worked at the Postal Service for 33 years, including as treasurer and senior vice president, and leads a nonprofit, nonpartisan group related to these issues, said that this conspiracy theory is the most far-flung thing I've ever heard. Ruth Goldway wrote a great op-ed in the New York Times By the way, in 2012, the New York Times itself, the editorial page, wrote an op-ed saying that the Postal Service needed to consolidate mailboxes, and now it's running headlines saying that the administration wants to destroy the Postal Service. Irony is dead, ladies and gentlemen. But Ruth Goldway is a Democrat. She's a former commissioner of the U.S. Postal Regulatory Commission. She was appointed by Bill Clinton, and she wrote that our Postal Service is, quote, perfectly capable of handling election mail. She added, I served as a regulator of the Postal Service for nearly 18 years under 3 presidents, and I urge everyone to be calm. Don't fall prey to the alarmists on both sides of this debate. The Postal Service is not incapacitated. It is still fully capable of delivering the mail. So I just think it's important amidst all the misinformation and confusion surrounding the Postal Service to sum up the facts. Because as I've dug into this issue over the week in order to prepare myself for this vote, 3 things stand out to me as obvious and inarguable. My daughter is now sleeping, which is very good. Oh, one sec. I'm still in that phase where I have to check to make sure she's breathing every 5 seconds because I'm anxious as a new parent. But the first thing is that the Postal Service is not on the verge of financial ruin. In other words, they don't need $25 billion in order to process mail-in ballots in this election. The post office has certainly seen a decline in revenue since 2008, but it's nowhere near financial insolvency. By its own admission, the Postal Service, she's making funny noises. By its own admission, the Postal Service has enough money to operate through August 2021. If you look at their financials, they have $14 billion cash on hand. We gave them the ability to borrow $10 billion through the CARES Act as well. And further, due to a surge in package volume during the coronavirus pandemic, the Postal Service has made $1.3 billion more in revenue since March than during the same time period last year. And that includes the $178 million it's earned from census and stimulus mail. So no rational person arguing in good faith could conclude that the $25 billion that Pelosi wants to give to the Postal Service has anything to do with the election. It doesn't. The Postal Service has structural financial issues related to primarily retiree medical benefits, overtime costs that are very thorny issues, right? There's a debate going on between the union and the Postmaster General that's spilling out into the public, and that's kind of behind a lot of this, but that's separate from money needed for election security. So it is just not honest to say that they need $25 billion in order to process mail-in ballots for the election. So that's point one. Point two is that despite what Jamie Lee Curtis might have shared online or what pictures are flying around social media, the administration is not trying to destroy mailboxes and mail sorting machines in order to rig the election. That is a dangerous lie. The post office has been consolidating mailboxes and mail sorting machines for the last decade because Americans are sending less paper mail. Think about this. It's 2020. We live in the digital age, right? My generation, we use something called email less or more than physical mail. To survive in the digital age, like a lot of legacy industries, including, ironically, the New York Times, the post office will have to consolidate its physical infrastructure. During the Obama administration, for example, the Postal Service removed 12,000 mailboxes to cut costs and modernize its administration. The Obama administration, 12,000 mailboxes were removed to cut costs. This has been happening for a long time. Over time, they've retired old letter processing machines that are not needed because of this drop in paper mail volume. And conversely, parcel mail delivery has been trending up for the Postal Service. That's how they generate most of their revenue. And Postmaster General DeJoy, who, by the way, is not a Trump appointee, but rather was put into his position by the Postal Service Board of Governors, has implemented new pilot initiatives based on the current needs of the Postal Service to improve its financial trajectory and streamline its operations. But given the current controversy, he's understandably put these reforms on hiatus until after the election. One thing I'd like to do is engage with someone smart on just these reforms DeJoy wants to do on their merits, right? Because I think there is a good faith argument about whether what DeJoy is trying to do is good for the Postal Service over the long term. It's just not arguing in good faith to suggest that DeJoy's reforms are about interfering with the election. It's just not true. It's a controversy. So I try to get Secretary McHugh, who's the former Army Secretary who works for an organization on these issues, who I think has a thoughtful critique of DeJoy, and hopefully we'll be able to do that in the future. But the third, and I think the most important point to keep in mind, is that the Postal Service is, and this is Ruth Goldway's point, the Postal Service is fully capable of handling vote by mail in this year's election. Even if all of the 158 million registered American voters decided to vote by mail, or the total possible mail volume of 316 million mailed ballots were actually going to happen, that would not exceed a typical day of total Postal Service mail volume. There's an average of 471 million pieces of mail each day that they process. The Postal Service has rightly warned states about changing their deadlines. So, for example, if a state allows you to get an absentee ballot a week before an election, but it doesn't count the ballot unless it's received the day of the election, that 7-day turnaround might be too short for them to process. That's what they're legitimately warning about. But as of June 2020, they've already processed more than 8 billion pieces of mail, including an estimated 450 million pieces of mail due to stimulus checks and census documents. So despite the logistical challenges imposed by the coronavirus and all the hysteria surrounding the operational changes at the post office, the Postal Service is entirely capable of handling a relatively minor increase in mail volume ahead of the election, and will actually benefit from the increase in revenue. Don't take my word for it, by the way. The head of one of the biggest Postal Service worker unions said this. He said it was a drop in the bucket, that they can handle it. So that to me is the most important thing, that even for states that are doing universal vote by mail, which by the way I think is a bad idea, I think New York's recent experience suggests it's a bad idea, the Postal Service can process it provided the timelines make sense and states don't have dumb last second changes. So those to me are three incontrovertible facts that we should all keep in mind. I have to hop off and change a diaper here, but I'll come back with my concluding thoughts in a little bit. Okay, so why does any of this matter? Well, I think it's important to understand what's going on here. In the first instance, because the post office matters. We have a lot of hardworking men and women that work for the post office that are trying to deliver our mail in very unusual and difficult circumstances. And the post office is, as I laid out, dealing with a lot of disruptive forces. And so I think it's important that we have an honest, good faith debate about how the post office can survive in the digital age, and what role does the federal government play in supporting an agency that is independent and largely funded off of its own revenues. And to the extent we are clouding that debate with unrelated issues, or politicians are exploiting the debate to score cheap political points, I actually think it damages the post office over the long term, or makes it less likely that Congress ever does something productive to help the post office, or learn the right lessons from how we deliver mail in the midst of a pandemic. Uh-oh, the baby has awoken. The dragon is waking. So hopefully she'll give me a few more minutes so I can close this up. But the second thing is that, okay, I was critical of the fact that we went on recess for all of August. I've always been critical of August recess. I think it makes no sense. I'm critical of the schedule in general in Congress. But I thought that when we got called back, that it would be for a debate and a compromise coronavirus bill, 4.0 bill, one that sort of provided businesses the legal protections they need to keep opening up, but also provided some targeted supports to states, school districts, nonprofits, and hospitals and frontline workers who need it right now. But instead, we're flying back for just a day on Saturday to vote on this post office bill. And most of this bill we already passed a month ago. And so I've seen a lot of dumb things in my 4 years in Congress, but this might be the dumbest. And it's just important to know. I mean, this is all just a manufactured political thing here. I mean, Nancy Pelosi sees a political opportunity, and she's taking it. So it's beneath the institution. It's embarrassing, I actually think, for Congress that we're ignoring the bigger issues that are right there, whether it's the pandemic or whether it's the collapse in law and order in the biggest cities across America and a spike in violent crime, and instead we're burning all of our calories on this. Which leads to the third thing, which is the most important. It seems obvious to me that this is a manufactured moral panic on the part of Democratic Party leaders, Speaker Pelosi, with a massive assist from the media, and it's done incredible damage, and it's caused massive confusion for Americans. It's even upset the bait. But I think you need to ask yourself, look how cute that little baby is. What is the worst outcome, in your opinion, come November 4th, the day after the election? Is it that your side loses? Maybe that's a bad outcome, but the worst outcome, in my opinion, is that neither side wins or loses, because one side, half the country, is claiming that the whole thing was rigged. And I think it's dangerous to suggest, whether it's through, to suggest that someone is out to destroy mailboxes and destroy the post office in order to suppress your vote, because it increases the likelihood that millions of Americans are going to wake up on November 4th having lost an election and think, well, you know what? This is because someone stole the election, stole my vote. That's a dangerous road to go down. I mean, that is banana republic territory. We've heard a lot of highfalutin rhetoric about the integrity of our elections. I chaired a bipartisan commission on cyber policy where we looked very closely at election security and all of the adversaries in cyberspace, nation-state actors like China trying to meddle in our elections. This is a serious issue. So we just don't have time to waste on dumb conspiracy theories like this. We're in the midst of a pandemic. We're in the early stages of an existential competition with a communist adversary. We simply cannot afford to constantly consume the empty calories of the conspiracy-filled culture war. It's embarrassing. It's self-defeating. It is unworthy of this great country. We have to do better. So, sorry to end on a little bit of a intense note there. I hope, even if you disagree with my position, at least you'll see that I'm honestly trying to lay out the different sides of this and at least suss out from all of the confusion what's true and what isn't. And I can see that my baby daughter is upset right now. But thank you for listening. Hopefully this was interesting, a little bit different than our usual new look. I find it helpful to talk through these complex issues and debate it with people of good faith that want to have an honest disagreement. And so I just kind of wanted to take you into that thought process prior to this vote. And again, hopefully cooler heads will prevail and this country will stop tearing itself apart leading up to November 3rd. Thanks.
The dude